in our community, and because we have such an exciting message to give people. And even just on Saturday, I door knocked a young woman who has blood cancer and is on the disability support pension. And she's really, really struggling, and she's not just worried about her health, she's worried about how she can afford to get the tests she needs to get throughout this process as she's desperately trying to fight this cancer. And she should be focusing on fighting for her life, not worrying about how much cash she has in her wallet. And so I'm really, really excited that we have more really great announcements today in the health space, even one specifically for Flinders University.
Thanks, Nadia. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here in South Australia in the seat of Boothby with our very capable candidate, Nadia Clancy. Today, Catherine and I are pleased to announce a significant new investment in pathology testing in Australia. We accept the argument that Australian pathologists have put to us that the system is near breaking in terms of bulk billing, that without a significant injection of new funds, that we could be jeopardising the wide take-up of bulk billing for pathology tests. You know, one of the great things about our healthcare system in Australia is that when a doctor prescribes a blood test, they can do so knowing that they're not putting financial pressure on our patients, that the system can afford the tests which patients need to help in the treatment that they require. But at the moment in Australia, it's estimated by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare that in fact 140,000 of our fellow Australians is currently not taking pathology tests because of the cost. Our system of bulk billing should not be jeopardised because of underinvestment in pathology. We need these tests when people are in the fight of their lives, and so Labor will invest $200 million so that we can keep the high rates of bulk billing in pathology where they are. I'd now like to invite Catherine to talk a little further, then we'd be happy to take some questions.
Thanks, Bill, and it's terrific to be here with Nadia Clancy, our candidate for Boothby, and also Emily Gore, our Senate candidate here in South Australia. Well, Bill and I are announcing a further part of Labor's $2.3 billion cancer plan today. And we know that pathology is vitally important for cancer diagnosis and cancer treatment. 100% of all cancers being diagnosed rely on pathology. It is a vital part of our healthcare system. And since Labor was last in office, we introduced bulk billing incentives to make sure we could keep the rate of bulk billing for pathology and keep free pathology for people across the country as high as it possibly could be. But since the Morrison government has been in place, 6 long years of a freeze on the Medicare rebate, pathology is under pressure. We had to fight them over the course of the last few years because they wanted to get rid of the bulk billing incentives, and we were successful in doing so. And today we've responded to Australian pathology telling us that because of the long freeze on the indexation of rebates for pathology, that pathology bulk billing is under pressure. This $200 million today will help support 3.2 million patients every year accessing pathology tests across the country. Cancer patients and older Australians who predominantly are highly represented in our cancer statistics. This will mean that pathology stays free for many, many Australians and that we support bulk billing. We're also going to be announcing today $2.5 million here at Flinders University Medical Centre, a really important facility that works so closely with the hospital here as part of our education precinct in South Australia for a $2.5 million clinical simulation lab. Now, simulation labs allow our doctors in training, our nurses in training, our other clinicians in training to actually have almost live experiences of significant crises that can occur in our hospital system. And it means that the quality of care that they provide while they're doing that training constantly will be significantly improved. We're very proud of that $2.5 million investment, and I want to thank Nadia for her advocacy here. I'm going to hand over to Eric, who is from Australian Pathology, to talk a little bit about the importance of Labor's $200 million commitment for pathology bulk billing today. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name's Eric Swain. I'm representing Australian Pathology. I've worked in this industry now for just over 20 years, and to hear the news today from ALP about their significant investment in pathology tests is something that is greatly welcomed by our industry. Australians may not know this, but every blood test, swab or biopsy that is done is actually touched by a pathologist. It's also worth noting that 100% of cancers are diagnosed by pathologists in our laboratories. So this announcement for cancer sufferers and older Australians is welcome to protect those that are most vulnerable. This investment of $200 million into bulk billing will protect the older Australians and those suffering from various cancers. It will enable no out-of-pocket costs for the diagnosis and testing required for cancer treatment. Thank you, Mr. Shorten.
Good on you, Eric. Thank you very much. Welcome words from the Peak Association representing pathology in Australia. Are there questions?
Mr. Shorten,
Maybe I'll start on this side.
Mr. Shorten, this morning you were asked about the Sharif children being brought back. What possible reason is there for not bringing them back to their family in Australia?
None that I can think of. Just on the Sharif children, they shouldn't be a political football. They've already suffered incredibly irresponsibly. Their parents took them to a war zone. Their parents took them into a regime of terrorism. But these children shouldn't be held responsible for what their parents did.
Mr. Shorten, significant parts of your negative gearing policy have been taken down from Labor's website, charts and graphics explaining how the policy will work. Can you explain why that's happening?
Yes, we're updating the documents. I mean, let's face it, if you want to talk about putting policies up front, we're doing that. We put our negative gearing policy out from the Sydney Town Hall in about February, March of 2016. As new numbers come to light, we update them. So I think if you want to look at the gold standard in terms of putting policies out there, I don't think any of you can really look past Labor. But if you want to look at what is not the gold standard, have a look at this very important report that the Grattan Institute has written today. I would encourage you all to read it. It has some real information there. What it shows is the Liberals' economic model on display yet again. It shows that for tax cuts on the Never Never, they are planning, though, to cut up to $40 billion a year in secret cuts. The government will have to answer during the course of this campaign. What are the secret cuts you're planning to promise an illusory tax increase in half a decade's time?
Mr. Shorten,
So I'll start here and with
and if you do, why do you believe Australian taxpayer money should go towards helping restore Notre Dame?
Restore.
Notre Dame in Paris.
Oh, listen, I think all of us were shocked to see that image. Notre Dame is a global icon. I don't know how many people here, but certainly I and millions of Australians over the years have backpacked or travelled to Paris. And one of those postcard moments of any young Australian's trip overseas is to go to Notre Dame. Notre Dame's an 800-year-old cathedral. It has survived civil war and religious strife, German occupation. So I think a lot of us were really sad and shocked to see what has happened today. I mean, for Australians, imagine if we saw the Opera House on fire. And that is what we've essentially seen in France. And Notre Dame, therefore, doesn't just belong to Paris or France, it belongs to the world. I like Mr Turnbull's idea that there should be some modest commitment to help rebuild if that is the case. And if that's what Friends are for, and I would encourage Mr Morrison to take up mine and Mr Turnbull's idea.
Should Australian Special Forces be used to go into Syria to get the Sharif children and other Australian children out of Syria? I'm
not going to start giving security advice. I'll leave that to the security agencies. Sorry.
In regards to your living wage policy, can you clarify who the 1.2 million workers you promised to pay rise are? Where did you get this figure from, and can you explain who exactly it is, given 180,000 workers are on the adult minimum wage?
Well, first of all, you'll find that about well over 1 million people are award dependent. And so they're the people I'm talking about. If you improve the living wage, if you improve the minimum wage to a living wage, then we want to see that eventually flow through to the people who are still reliant on the award system. That number's bigger than 100,000 people. But I get where the question's coming from, and it's really about this ongoing boast that Mr Morrison keeps saying about a strong economy. Let's unpack what a liberal strong economy is based upon. It's based upon two principles. The first is keep wages as low as possible, and they're proud of that, and keep making sure that the profits go up and up. This government has an almost religious conviction that if you can make the richest people in Australia richer, the richest companies in Australia richer, then eventually some of the crumbs will fall off the table. So that's the first leg of the principles of Mr Morrison's strong economy, keep wages down. The second leg, though, and the Grattan Institute's blown the whistle on this again today, is that the number two method this government believes keeps a strong economy is by reducing real spending on essential services which working Australians require. TAFE, universities, childcare, healthcare. These are the services which working Australians and Australians depend upon. If that's what Mr Morrison calls a strong economy, low wages and reduction in real services, then that's not the strong economy Australia needs. Labor, by contrast, believes in a strong economy built upon fairness and decency. And we are not going to stand by and watch Mr Morrison boast about a strategy which sees the rich get richer and everyone else just miss out, where the cost of living is squeezing millions of wage earners. Sorry, here, and I will come around, sorry. Yeah.
Have you or any of your colleagues spoken to Sam Dastyari about today's pathology announcement?
I haven't, and indeed this pathology announcement stands on its own 2 feet, doesn't it? I mean, when you think about it, and I'll get Catherine to supplement the answer, pathology makes sick people well. It has that potential. When you're in the fight of your life, 100% of cancer needs pathology. So I understand if perhaps the government doesn't like the fact that we're leading on healthcare as we do, but the experts tell us there is a problem, that the bulk billing levels of pathology are under pressure. As I said earlier, but I think it's a pretty fair point, one of the great strengths of our medical system is that doctors can recommend tests and they're very confident that's not going to put added financial pressure on patients. I want to preserve that system, but the problem is, and Catherine can talk at more length, 140,000 Australians now annually are recorded as not taking their pathology tests because they can't afford to. But I might hand over to Catherine for a moment. Yeah, I will, but I'll let Catherine talk about our announcement first.
Sure. Spoken to him.
Thanks. Thanks very much. And the answer is to that is no from me. But certainly in terms of pathology, what we know has been happening since Labor was last in office, we introduced bulk billing incentives because we know how critical it is for people to get those tests if they're going to actually find out what is going on with their health, whether it be from cancer diagnosis, diabetes, other really important chronic diseases that we have in our community. Pathology is absolutely vital to that. What the Liberals tried to do, what they tried to do in their mid-year economic financial statement in 2015 was actually get rid of those bulk billing incentives, cut $600 million out of diagnostic imaging and pathology, and they faced a complete pushback because what that would have meant is that Australians across the country would have seen starting to have to pay co-payments for pathology. What we're doing today is making sure that bulk billing for pathology stays high, and that'll benefit over 3.2 million Australians across the country every single year as they get tests for cancer and older Australians for tests for a whole range of other diseases.
But there's a difference between...
Sorry, I will come to you, Jade. Just hang on a sec, Digger.
There's been allegations that the Liberal Party's candidate in Chisholm made homophobic comments. Does she need to apologise, and does the Prime Minister need to?
Well, I think it'll be very interesting to see how Mr Morrison handles this rogue candidate in Chisholm. It'll be very interesting indeed to see how he handles it, because he needs to make up his mind on a couple of questions. One, whether he wants as a candidate for the Liberal Party someone who said such hurtful things about her fellow Australians. And two, whether he wants as a candidate for the Liberal Party someone who stood in front of the media and said it didn't happen when clearly it did. This will be up a test for him to see how he handles it in coming days. Sorry, you were next.
Can you rule out no new or increased taxes on superannuation?
Yeah, we have no plans to increase taxes on superannuation. We have no plans to introduce any new taxes on superannuation. Sure.
Mr Shorten.
John.
Almost exclusively since your budget reply speech focused on health. When can voters expect to learn more about Labor's emission reduction target, how you're going to get there and the cost to the economy?
Well, first of all, I haven't spoken exclusively about health.
To be fair,
I've just...
Some of your staff have said the same in private conversations. You focus pretty exclusively on this.
I don't know what private conversations you have with people or what you want to reveal, but let me just go to the record. I just said 4 minutes ago, Mr. Morrison loves to boast about his strong economy. I'm pretty sure we were all here when I said that, but let me say it again because I think it's a really good point to make. Mr. Morrison loves to boast about his strong economy, but his strong economy is your classic liberal strong economy. It's built upon two propositions. One, low wages. They're proud of it. They almost have a religious fervour, don't they, about being happy when the wages are low and corporate profits are up. Did you know that since the last election, corporate profits have gone up 39%, but in fact wages have moved on average 5%. And the second leg that he relies upon for this liberal strong economy is the reduction in real spending on services, in particular health, but also I mentioned education, I mentioned TAFE, I mentioned childcare. The problem for Australia is that a liberal strong economy relies on the mythical belief that if the biggest corporations in Australia make a lot of money, if the richest people in Australia can pay less tax through the loopholes, that miraculously everyone else benefits. That hasn't been the lived experience. Labor has a different view about what creates a strong economy. What creates a strong economy is fairness and decency.
You're not answering the question, Mr. Shorten.
Okay. I'm going to give someone else a go. Dan.
When can people know, Mr. Shorten, the cost of the economy? You didn't answer the
Do you know what, John? I'm going to go to the next person.
Answer the question. That's why we're here to ask questions, and you're not answering the question.
Dan.
When can people expect to know, Mr. Shorten, the cost of the economy?
All right, Dan.
Why can't you answer the question, Mr. Shorten?
Because I'm going to give your colleagues half a go.
No, because
Dan.
you should answer it. Why can't you answer the question, Mr. Shorten?
Dan, I'm going to go to you.
On pathology, Mr. Shorten, 9 out of 10 pathology blood tests are done out of hospitals. 99% of those are already bulk billed. How can you say the system's at breaking point when the rate is 99%? And can you guarantee this $200 million or any of it will just kill the bottom lines of pathology companies?
Well, I just refer you to the Institute of Health and Welfare saying that 140,000 of our fellow Australians already are delaying or not having pathology tests because of the cost. But I might get Catherine to talk about how this is an important addition to protecting and preserving our existing system.
Well, we know that it will because pathologists are telling us that. They're telling us because of the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison government freeze on Medicare rebates that has had an impact on pathology, that they are at breaking point. We knew when we were in government that we wanted to keep bulk billing. It's why we introduced bulk billing incentives, and then this government tried to get rid of them. We know that this will be a new Medicare item that we work with pathologists on, again, that they only get if it is bulk billed, that will preserve the rates of bulk billing for pathology. It's too important for us not to. We know 100% of cancers are reliant on pathology for diagnosis, as are many, many other diseases, and this ensures that we are absolutely keeping the bulk billing rate high for pathology, which is too important for us not to.
Minister, can I just... Pathology companies come to you and say we want more money. Do you just roll over and accept that argument without scrutiny? And is
Not at all.
The process that applies to other industries as well?
Not at all. We work very closely, obviously. We listen to industry, we listen to patient groups across the country, we listen to cancer groups across the country, and I've been the Shadow Minister for some 6 years now. I'm pretty experienced in what's actually happening across the healthcare sector. I know that bulk billing for pathology will come under pressure and is under pressure. 140,000 Australians already not actually getting access to pathology tests because they can't afford it. It is always difficult in this area, but is going to be even more difficult if we don't actually undo the damage that this government has done because of its long freeze on Medicare rebates.
But hasn't the government done a better job? It was 97% in 2013 when you guys left office, and it's above 99% now.
Again, the bulk billing incentives that Labor introduced are working, and this is a government that tried to get rid of them, tried to cut them. If you remember the 2016 election campaign, 600,000 people signed a petition against Turnbull's cuts to pathology. We stopped them. We stopped them doing that, and that's why it remains high today and why only Labor can make sure it will stay high.
But if it remains high today, how can you say that it's a breaking point?
Again, listen to the pathologists.
Sorry. Sorry, why don't we go? Who's Tim?
Could I ask on those 90 excluded pages, re your capital gains and negative gearing changes? You say there are new assumptions, so they need updating, which is a pretty fine thing. How do the assumptions change the costings on those two programs? And assuming that they're not affected, would you release the 90 pages so we can have a look?
Listen, I think the original question comes from a story I read in the Fin by Nicholas Lenahan, and then it was followed up with a question here. We've said, and I went and checked when I saw the story, said, how come this page is down? They said they're updating it. I can't add any more at this point.
Mr. Shorten, in Boothby, do you support the South Australian Government's plans for the Repat General Hospital? And if so, will you match the $35 million in coalition funding pledged?
Yes, we will.
Mr. Shorten,
I might get Catherine to, do you just want a little more detail than yes?
I'm going to say yes too. Look, in fact, I actually, even overnight, I've actually been emailed by someone who, in the community, who operates out of there, saying the repat will be really important, particularly for elective surgery. We will match that commitment, and we'll have more to say about our capital plans across South Australia to improve public hospitals across this community.
So the Health Minister here says they haven't heard from Labor at all on
We
this.
actually wrote to the, well, I can tell you now, I actually wrote to the Health Minister, and he replied to me and did not even mention repat as one of the things that he wanted Labor to put capital into. So I wrote to that Health Minister over 2 months ago now, and the repat wasn't even mentioned. We know it's important to this community. We know it's important to Boothby. I know Nadia has made sure I know it's important to Boothby, and we will fund it.
So Brainerd Spinal Care Hub and
Sorry, I'll just keep moving around. Jade, did you want to ask a question?
In terms of the Sharoof children, is there anything more that the government should be doing there? And if they do come home, are there particular measures that you would like to see in place to ensure that they're, have some comfort?
Listen, I don't want to second guess the government on this. These kids should not be a political football. Obviously, the grandmothers worked very hard to try and see these children's welfare is put back up the top of the charts. But I'm not going to engage in criticism of the government when I'm unaware of exactly what they've done. In terms of what happens when they come back, the experts will be looking at it, but I've got no doubt there's a fair bit of trauma there. I don't know, any of us could imagine if our kids were dragged to those war zones and terror zones, and we've all seen some of the images of what Sharoof exposed his kids to. You know, these kids need to be given a little bit of room and a lot of love. Probably if they can get a lot of love, then I suspect that'll be the best way to help reabsorb them into Australian life.
Mr. Shorten.
Sorry, I will come back to you again.
South Australian irrigators have been told over the last 24 hours that they were only going to get 14% of the allocation, which they were hoping to get, or they feared they might get 50%, they were hoping to get 100%.
Yeah.
What is Labor's plan to fix the Murray, and does it include, or could it include, resparking up this $2.2 billion desalination plant that we have here?
Well, first of all, there are no jobs on the dead river, and South Australia's been handed the rough edge of the pineapple when it comes to the current federal government. Labor put in place the plan for the basin, getting the balance right between river survival and therefore job survival and fish survival and ecological survival and agricultural needs. There's no doubt to my mind that for anyone who cares about the future of the Murray-Darling Basin, anyone who lives in South Australia, anyone who's concerned about that fish kills that we saw this January and over the Christmas holidays, this government's failed. So we want to put the basin plan back on top. Obviously, we want to bring all the stakeholders together, including South Australians, southern irrigators, northern irrigators, because at the moment, this is an ecological disaster, and the story in the Advertiser really spelt that out pretty clearly, I think. Perhaps one or two more questions. Richard, sorry. No, I haven't given Richard one. I haven't given Richard one.
Mr. Shorten, will you sack the CMFEU's Michael Ravbar from the Labor National Executive now he's been fined by the federal court?
Listen, that'll be a matter for the National Executive. No one's above the law. Unionist, banker, Clive Palmer. No one's above the law. But in terms of the National Executive matters, I'll leave that to the Labor Party.
Mr. Shorten,
Sorry.
do you think it's appropriate that Sam Dastyari's employer will make a mozza out of today's announcement?
Well, first of all, Mr. Dastyari is no longer a senator. He paid a pretty big price, I think, for mistakes he made. I'm not about to get... He's got a right to a life after politics, as I think all political people do. But I just got to go to this issue of pathology. Is the government really arguing that we shouldn't be investing more in pathology? Is the government really arguing that we shouldn't put downward pressure on the cost of pathology so that we can make sure that we maintain our bulk billing system? If they're arguing that, then they're more out of touch than I originally thought. Thanks, everybody. One last, but when I give you one last, then everyone else is going to pick on me.
Really good, they won't need to.
You'll have to answer to that.
On the weekend, you made some very strong comments about people spending more than $3,000 on managing their tax affairs. You said it was a loophole and a rort. Are you surprised that organisations like the CPA and the Institute of Public Accountants are making such partisan opposition to that during the election campaign? Usually they'd be a bit less in the thick of the political campaign.
Listen, I think our CPAs are excellent. Love accountants. I noticed there was usual propaganda from News Limited which said that we're against the professions. We're not. But really, in this country, can we afford to be giving away millions of dollars of tax subsidy to people for the cost of minimising their tax already? I mean, we're talking about the taxes which nurses and tradies pay to Canberra. I would rather use that taxpayer money for the best schools in the world, for the best TAFE, for the best aged care, for the best healthcare system. It's a matter of priorities. Am I surprised that a vested interest whose business model relies upon tax subsidies isn't happy if we're going to reform it? No. I get why they mightn't like it. But we've got to ask ourselves in this country, are we just a country who wants to maintain tax subsidies and loopholes for the big end of town? Or are we a country who wants to invest in our people? At the end of the day, we're not changing the ability of accountants to do work for their customers. We're just saying that perhaps once you're paying over $3,000 a year to an accountant, you shouldn't be able to deduct that off your tax. It is not. It is not how it's been characterised in News Limited, and I expect to see more of these dishonest scare campaigns about Labor. But at some point, the political process in this country has got to put ordinary people back at top of the pile. We've got to start saying, do you want your kids not to be able to get all the classes they need, be they kids who need special needs or be they kids who need extensions and advancements in their class? Do we want to be a country who can't afford to be alongside you when you're in the fight of your life on cancer? Do we want to be a country who does nothing on climate change? Do we want to be a country who just says, well, we'd rather give a tax subsidy to someone claiming $1 million and let them write that off their tax when they've already minimised their tax beyond that? It's all about choices and values. We want to run an economy which is fair and decent, not one which supports lower wages and cuts to real services. Thanks, everybody. No, I did say last one, sorry. We'll have to take it up with him.
Thank you.
It was